here, and thanks for braving the rain, and I apologize for us being late. We got started out, well, we had a radio show this morning and then had planned plenty of time to be here, but we had almost zero visibility for part of the trip here, so. But thank you for sticking around, and it's really good to be with you today. I always enjoy working with and being able to talk with chambers, because it kind of highlights what I think is best about Texas. And I think just in the last few years about being a representative, what we've gone through, I was elected just out of Harvey, and so a lot of what we've done in the past and a lot of our efforts over the last year have worked with communities and bringing back, helping us recover from Harvey and get all the grant funding we needed and get projects in place. And then we went from that to, just as, you know, and we're still actually working on some projects. We were just doing a groundbreaking last, was it Friday or Thursday? Friday. Then we went into a pandemic and dealing with all, not only the hospitalizations and all those kind of things, but many of you remember the PPP loans that we were working with, and that program got stood up so quick, and so it was very much real time, putting out calls and trying to get feedback from businesses so we could kind of tweak the program as it was being stood up to make sure. And I can tell you, one of the big things that we worked on, particularly in that, but it's mindful of, it was mindful in Harvey, I was mindful of that in PPP, and just in generally our approach is the difference of how larger communities and smaller communities are represented in a lot of these things, and making sure that smaller communities don't get overlooked in the process of this. Because you can imagine, like the Houstons and the Dallases, they have like a whole, you know, army of lawyers and lobbyists and those kind of things, and a lot of times even in the rulemaking, or at least in the going after the funds after it's done, there's a lot of effort there. And we were a consistent voice, and thankfully in the last administration we were heard on the voice of making sure that smaller communities didn't get overlooked. And so in the PPP program we were able to make sure that, you know, I was really concerned that the banks of America were going to give out all the money to major institutions, and thankfully that didn't happen. It was spread, not perfectly, but we were able to get a lot of help to a lot of people. So so we went from that to now we're looking at supply chains and those kind of things. And you know, I was just in a Target yesterday, and you can see the lines that are, the shelves that are emptied, and talked to a number of restaurant owners in the last 3 or 4 days who, you know, it used to be you just place your order, and now they're having to take a significant part of their week just trying to find supplies and cups and flatware and, you know, all these different kind of things. We have some challenges ahead of us for sure. But through all of this, what's been awesome to see is Texans working with Texans to make our communities work, to make our families work, to make our schools work, to do what we can to work together, to, in spite of what happens or doesn't happen in Washington, D.C., to do our best to work together to get things done. That's not to minimize the challenges that we have. Obviously, you also come to Washington to do a job, and I do take it very seriously. And it's an honor to serve, but I take with you all, I take the weight of the job as it should be, knowing who I'm working for, and realizing that it's you all that I'm working for. I've often said that my first task as a representative is to listen. So in spite of the fact that I'm up here talking a bit, I'm gonna just throw out a couple things at the beginning, but very welcome to get your thoughts, your feedback, answer any questions and those kind of things, and would like to take up time rather talking about the things that interest you, and also getting feedback, because that's how we do our job. You know, we can't go to Washington and take your voice with us unless we hear from you. And so whatever industry or thing that you're involved with, you know, I'm on the ag committee, for example, but I'm very well aware that the farmers and ranchers in our district who are doing this and working the fields and, you know, doing this 24/7 are always going to know a lot more about ag than I do. And too often in DC, what we see, I remember when I was running for office for the first time, I would tell people, you know, I'm not running because I think I know it all. I think we have enough people in Washington who already think they do know it all. What I do think I can do is do my best to listen, to work with people in our community, and try to take that voice to DC and do the best to work with that. Now, I can say, we knew we were challenging, it was challenging times when we went in, but these last 3 years, I think have taken that to a whole new level with what we're facing in our nation right now. And of course, it is a critical time. Right now, obviously, in DC, it's a challenging place to get things done, for sure. It always has been, and in a sense should be. Some people have said that the genius of our system with the checks and balances is to make sure that to be a limiting factor on government, I should say, to make sure that our federal government stays limited. Of course, we've seen the growth of it over time. I do believe that as government expands, liberty contracts, and so that's one of those things that we have to constantly be aware of as a federal government. A lot of times it's not only what we should do, it's what we should be doing or should stop doing, and a lot of the things that we need to be wary of in creating the environment that allows the American people to do their best work. So we need to protect a free market environment that allows the American people, allows the businesses to step up. And a lot of what we're seeing right now is the federal government, of course, spending trillions and trillions of dollars in the name of trying to fix some of these issues. But what we're seeing now is inflation. We're seeing a lot of these issues that we're dealing with in large part because of the federal government, in a sense, doing quite a bit. Of course, in our district, probably the biggest issue I hear stuff on or concerns about is the border. The border has been an issue, obviously, from Texas that we've been intimately involved in. When I got to DC, I'm from South Texas, and so a number of representatives had no idea really what was going on at the border. And then bringing knowledge and understanding to the fact that what's going on in the border isn't just, it's not just this organic movement of people looking for a better life. It's actually driven by cartels. They work as tourist agencies and agents in a sense, and marketing agents in a sense, and work all over the country to try to get people through here. I think most people understand now that people coming across the border are paying in some form or fashion. Many of them thousands of dollars. Usually if you're coming from a Golden Triangle country, it's roughly $5,000, $7,000, $8,000. If you're coming from China, it's $70,000 is kind of the going rate. And so all this is enriching these cartels that in turn not only create havoc in our community. Right now in our nation, the #1 killer of people under 65 is fentanyl. It's fentanyl. It's not cancer, it's not traffic accidents, it's fentanyl. And all of that, most of it's being made in China, coming through cartels, and then coming up into our country and finding its way even to our schools and those kind of things. And so it's something that we should be very concerned about. And I think about all the efforts that we've put into as a nation of stopping COVID, and we're almost seeing the reverse of that when it comes to stopping what's coming in to our country via cartels on the border. And so I remember my very first meeting with the border, and this is again 3 years ago, completely different environment. It was before these massive surges that we are seeing. And even then I had asked the people at the border, I said, what's the next win for you? What are you trying to get to? And they said, we would like to have the resources enough to have situational awareness. So they wanted to have enough cameras, enough technology, just to be able to keep up with and understand what the cartels were doing on the border. Because the cartels had better cameras, better technology, better everything, in being able to deal and understand what was going on at the border. And so they just wanted to reach a point of situational awareness, which to me, that was devastating to me, because like, to me, we should be pushing back. We should be winning the war at the border. We should be securing the border. We should be securing our communities, pushing back on the influence of cartels. And then I'm also on the Mexico Interparliamentary Group. And when I met with Mexican counterparts in their Congress, and I said, look, we're all God's children. We want people to prosper everywhere. You know, half the world's population makes less than $10 a day. The solution to that is not bringing everybody here. It's us championing those principles, that being that shining city on a hill where other nations know you embrace these policies, you can have the same sort of kind of freedom, prosperity in your nation. When I said that, it was applause from them. You know, my wife is a naturalized citizen, so she came here from Mexico. We went through the immigration process. process, so there's a right way to do it, and really, so the message is all about incentivizing a legal process and de-incentivizing an illegal process that empowers cartels and causes them to be a destabilizing force even for legitimate government and business in Central and South America. So I know of industries, right now Mexico needs energy, for example. We have the solution to that problem as an industry. Now we have some regulatory issues, that have crept into place in the last year. But we could provide the solution to that, but there's very few companies wanting to invest billions of dollars in an environment where they know the cartels are going to siphon off 10-20% of that, and are very concerned about the security situation. So it's one of those where it could be a win-win situation economically. We could see economic growth, we can see that kind of development. But if we continue to have these policies that allow cartels to flourish, it's devastating. And when you really get into the havoc that they're investing in, or that they're inflicting on the lives of the people that are coming across, many of them don't have the full fee to pay. And so I've seen the videos of dads stripped down, beaten in that video sent, asking for more money. I've been in the facilities where, hundreds of young women there, half of who will admit they've been sexually assaulted along the journey. I've been to the ranches where the ranch owners will talk about the rape trees that are there. It's devastating, it's horrific, and the cartels have gotten to the point of realizing that they view human life as cheap, is really what it is. And so you can sell a kilo of Coke one time, but they look at a human life as residual income, and it's just devastating. I think we should be treating them like any other terrorist organization that was stationed on our southern border. And so I've co-sponsored legislation that would name these cartels as a terrorist organization. And in the last administration, we were able to put together a working group that helped put together some of the policies. We took it to President Trump, actually met with him in the Oval Office, myself and 4 or 5 others, and presented a number of options, kind of like a menu of options for him, half of which he was able to put into place as part of his border solution. And so that's one of the big things. Even in last week, we had a committee hearing in the Ag Committee with Secretary Vilsack, and so we're talking about all the issues that are important, but the number one issue I hear from farmers and ranchers, while we have a number of issues, is the border in our community. They're constantly being run over, fences run over, they find dead bodies on their property. They're concerned about sending their family out on their own property, because I know somebody who asked their daughter a few years ago, hey, can you go in the shed and get something out of it? Sure, went in there and walked in on a meeting the cartel was having. That's the kind of stuff that we shouldn't have to be dealing with here in South Texas. We're also working to make sure that farmers and ranchers in our area get federal funds, because they are personally having to foot the bill for what should be a federal issue. And so we're working right now to, and had talked to Secretary Vilsack about it last week, of ensuring that they're able to get some sort of funds. For some ranchers have spent, we're talking 6 figures every year, rebuilding fences that have been run over and knocked down, and cattle that get out, and all those kind of things. Also, we'll have farmers who are growing crops, and they'll have a group of migrants come through their crop. Well, that's food that's now contaminated, or there's water supplies that are now contaminated that they have to kind of box off, and it becomes an issue. And so if you know any farmers, you already know they're operating on very thin margins as it is, and so when they have to section off those kind of things, it becomes a very big challenge. So obviously the border is not the only issue that's going on. Our economy and the supply chains and everything that needs to be done there is working on the Ag Committee. We've been trying to get, historically speaking, I was looking forward to it because I'm on the Oversight Committee as well, and if you watch, we talk about watching C-SPAN, if you watch the Oversight Committee, that's usually where a lot of the knockdown, drag-out battles happen. And they need to happen, and we should have that, so there's a point to it. Personally, I think what should guide the oversight process is every year the Government Accountability Office puts out this list of all the ways that the federal government is wasting money. Yeah. And to me, typically we have one hearing every year on this on this list. To me, it was like we should be meeting on that list every single week. To make the list, one of the qualifications is your program has to be at risk of losing $1 billion. So at the federal level, we don't start counting waste until it reaches the $1 billion mark. Now, to me, that's troubling. You know, I'm very much a fiscal conservative. I think we take in plenty of money. We just need to be a little more careful about where we're sending it. When you look at some of the things that we've spent money on in the past, you know, we spent tens of billions of dollars building natural gas stations in Afghanistan, and then realized that nobody's driving natural gas cars in Afghanistan. You know, so we need to be better. To me, you know, and a lot of these, constantly when I'm in DC, I'm talking to people about, you know, and I talked to other members up there in committees and said, you know, politicians in DC somehow get away with saying, with equating their personal compassion with how much of your money we give to somebody else. You know, it's like, to me, compassion is how much, what am I doing personally, you know? And so, you know, am I giving, but it's not taking your money and giving it to somebody else. That's not charity. And to be honest, even sometimes I feel awkward when people come and tell me like, thank you for, you know, I mean, we're doing our best diligence, but it's your money and I'm trying to help be a good steward of it. But when it comes to that, you know, we should get down on those fiscal issues. One of the very first bills I introduced was a bill called the Cost Estimates Improvement Act. And basically, whenever we present a bill, we send it to the CBO, they score it, and then it comes back to us. And then we're supposed to use that figure to make decisions. Well, they never include the cost of insurance, or interest, I should say. And so every bill we pass right now, it'd be like going to buy a car and not even asking what the return, and then suddenly you get your monthly bill and you're like, whoa. And now with inflation happening right now, it was already projected that our interest spending is about to surpass our military spending. Let that sink. Our spending on interest every year is about, so we can talk about all the pet programs we want, we can talk about all the wonderful things we'd love to do with federal government, or federal government should be doing this or that, wherever you are on that spectrum, we can't do any of that if we don't fix the fiscal issues. And I will say, as Americans, we are so privileged sometimes to have been raised in relative peace and prosperity. When you look at the global, you know, we're blessed. Even with all the challenges going right now, you'd rather be here than somewhere else. And so, but with that, sometimes it's hard for us to picture it in the context of history and recognize that this isn't guaranteed to us. Ronald Reagan said, you know, freedom and liberty doesn't pass automatically in the bloodstream. It has to be fought for, it has to be protected and passed on to others to do the same. And so the last part of that quote, though, has been what's really resonating with me, especially in the last several months, is he said, or else one day we'll have to tell our kids and grandkids what it was once like to live in a land where people were free. And we are at the point in our nation, the average superpower throughout history lasts 240 to 250 years. We just celebrated 245 years. And some of the key factors of a nation in decline is usually they crumble from within. They do it because they have bad fiscal policies and an overextended military are some of the two key factors. Now, we're not long gone. We have a lot of advantages as a country, but a lot of the policies that we see being put in place right now are shooting ourselves in the foot. I'll just give you one quick little example. For example, right now we are the only nation with access to two oceans, the two great oceans. That gives us a tremendous advantage. Our river system, the way it connects to the fertile lands in our country, gives us a tremendous advantage as far as trade and being able to produce things efficiently and get things out to market and meet the world's demands. But right now, one of the big issues in the supply chain crisis, and there's no silver bullet, there's a lot of them, but it's we have a shortage of truckers, but we also have these ports along the California coast, and you hear about how they're all backed up. Well, California regulations on truckers, on trucks and truckers truckers don't want to go into California to get to the ports because of the heavy regulatory burden on them. So it's one of those, we have this great advantage, but we're shooting ourselves in the foot with our policies. And so we have to be very careful about whatever these policies are, even if they're well-intentioned. To me, having compassion is having the due diligence to make sure that the money we're spending is actually accomplishing. It's not just putting it toward what seems like an altruistic motive. It's us actually putting forth the effort to say, is it accomplishing what it's set to do, doing the due diligence and making sure that we're spending the American taxpayer dollar appropriately. And so there's a lot of challenges ahead of us. Again, I've been kind of rambling on. So this week, for example, I'll tell you one bill that's coming up. And we see this a lot. This week we have a bill coming up that's supposed to be addressing the issue. It's called the Competes Act. And bills always have a great name. So never judge, never judge anyone's voting record on the name of a bill. I assure you. Oftentimes, sometimes the bills actually, when you get into the nitty gritty of it, it's 3,000 pages long. Okay, yeah, pretty typical. No, lately, but they'll end up actually doing opposite of what it says to do. So the idea is that, okay, we need to compete against China, we need to solve the supply chain crisis, and so the idea is that we'll go more in debt, some of it to China, in order for us to spend your money to give more money in some of these. Part of it is us funneling money through the IMF and funneling money through the UN to China. So this is how we're going to compete with China. Now, if it's a 3,000 page bill, there's going to be a couple good things in it too, you know. So this is unfortunately how Washington has been acting. I was in an ag committee here, and I'll give you a little taste again of what is going on. Ag committee, I was getting to the second ago, but I got off. Oversight committee, that part ag committee, it's usually historically been bipartisan. It's where people can come together, focus on the issues. The last this term, it's been pretty challenging. We haven't seen that. I can tell you 2 weeks ago, we had an ag committee hearing on electric vehicles for ag, so electric tractors. Now, I'm not opposed to electric tractors. I have no, if the market leads that way and ends up being efficient, we have the rare earth minerals to support it and, you know, all that kind of stuff. It's not that I'm opposed to it, but what I told them in the committee hearing, I said, you know, when I'm traveling around and talking to farmers and ranchers, I have one person to come to me and say, if only I had an electric tractor. I've had a lot of people come to me and say, I wish I could find parts to the tractor I already have, you know, and so it's been that Washington kind of like not in touch with reality of what's going on. And so we have oil and gas policies that have been put in place that have doubled, quadrupled fertilizer prices. We have no pesticides, and so you put those two things together, your crop returns are going to be really short. And if you think we have supply chains now, wait till a year after harvest under these conditions where we can't find parts for equipment, we don't have fertilizer, we don't have pesticides, and then that crop is what we're having to face in our stores. You know, so these are the real challenges that are facing us now. But what seems to guide the DC dialogue is a lot of the Green New Deal objectives, and I'm not talking about conservation, I'm talking about, you know, it taking to an extreme. And one thing I remind people in the context of all the Green New Deal objectives is, and this is true in the oil and gas and energy conversations we've been involved in, but also in the ag, is if, I was in a committee hearing and the chairperson said, we're in a national climate catastrophe, a national climate emergency. And I pointed out, I said, well, if there is a national, or if there is a climate emergency, it's not a national one. The climate doesn't stop at the borders. It's a global one. And so we have to look at this all in a global context. And the truth is that whether in the ag community, whether in the energy industries, the United States American worker is producing it much more responsibly, much more cleaner, efficiently than the rest of the world. And so the answer in these questions right now is, if we want to provide a more sustainable environment, all those kind of things, is for our products to take up a bigger share on the world stage. And so we need to let the American worker compete, and we need to make sure that we have those policies in place that are allowing the American worker to compete. Now, we can still be on the cutting edge, but if we can get so far out there that we're just playing into China's hands. A couple things on that. Obviously, China is our biggest threat right now. USMCA was renegotiated, and right now they're about $13 to $18 billion behind on their investment to our ag community, which of course affects the economy in this entire region, not to mention the food supply for our entire nation. But they also control 90% of the rare earth minerals throughout our country. So anytime anybody's talking about all this Green New Deal energy, it all starts with rare earth minerals, all of it. And until we're willing to mine for rare earth minerals, we are playing into China's hands on every little bit of this. And so that's part of what's driving a lot of the dialogue behind this. It's again, us not using our strengths as a nation and ceding our strengths to other nations that don't have the best interest in mind. And I will say this, for all, no nation is perfect, for sure, but if you look throughout history at every stage, every generation, and even now, the United States being the supreme influence in the world has been a net positive by far, than it would be if China or Russia or Iran or North Korea or any of these other competing nations were to gain the influence and us be diminished. And so it's so strong right now, so important that we do what we can from the federal perspective to make sure the American economy continues to flourish. And first of all, is kind of repaired and then continues to flourish so that we can be that shining city on a hill that we can for the rest of the world. And so I've rambled on enough, but I'm happy to take questions and talk about whatever you want to talk about. So.
I just want to appreciate and say we're grateful to have you, first of all. I don't know where to start with my questions. There's too many. But how many cartels are we dealing with down there on the border?
There's.
I mean, we put one of the biggest ones in jail.
Well, we put the head in jail, but you know, it's still an entrenched operation. And first of all, sometimes we think cartels, we think like 1980s street gangs, but these guys are super sophisticated. You need to be thinking more multinational corporation. They have lawyers. They know our immigration law better than some of our immigration lawyers here. They have economists on board who are, you know, once they fix the money, they're money laundering and investing and doing all these kind of things. So you have 3 or 4 major ones, but then you have all these little sublets and they contract and subcontract, and now they're getting into the gig economy even, to where they're even just hiring Uber people to take people. Or one of the big issues that we've been working with, like Facebook and Instagram on, is they're recruiting a lot of young people, kind of like the gig economy, and they just put a post social media, hey, you want to make a quick 1,000, DM me here, and so you have a member who's not even really in the cartel, but just some teen or somebody who wants. Some young person.
I look at the cartels like snakes. You got to find the head of the snake to kill it.
Sure.
And how many heads of snakes do we have out there to really get this problem under control? I mean, we obviously have a consumer problem in the United States because people want to buy it. Mm-hmm. And we got to solve that problem, but we got to get rid of these snakes.
Yeah, one of the other ways to do that, I mean, the thing is, if we just go after the head, there's gonna be somebody, I mean, they're competing for power all the time, you know, so we've got to have a continued, consistent, concerted effort to go after them. And that's why I'm for like naming them as terrorist organizations and sending in some special forces to take them out and weed them out. I think
we've done that in the past, by the way.
What's that?
We've done that in the past.
Right, and so, but Mexico, for example, has got to know that we're gonna provide a consistent enough because anyway, there's so much corruption going. There was a sheriff's race in the United States, Hidalgo County, where both sheriffs were running, both candidates were running on an anti-cartel platform. Both of them had already been paid for and bought by the cartel. Oh wow! And that's in the United States. So that's coming. It's
so pervasive.
Yeah, we have over 100 nations who've come through completely unchecked right now. And I mean, you saw the video. I've been talking about it for a year, but you saw the video just recently how, you know, there are midnight drops and planes landing and buses showing up in cities. They're not calling the county, they're not calling the governor, they're not calling the county judge, they're not calling, so suddenly your schools are figuring out how to deal with it, your hospitals, you know, it's a big challenge. One of the big things I think we could do is invest more in stopping the money going back too. I think that part is overlooked. A huge part of Mexico's economy is money coming from the United States to Mexico. And so if we stopped the money and worked on how to stop the money from getting back into their hands, we also de-incentivize the whole system. So that's another way I think we should be.
Well, I had my debit card stopped on a foreign transaction this morning. Seems like we can stop a lot of debit cards going to Mexico.
Yeah, we certainly could, for that, so. Anyone else? Or you?
You know, I'm always gonna go veterans on you, Michael.
Yes,
right?
sir.
Just to bring awareness to it for everybody, there's two bills, well, there's HR 333 and there's S 344 out there. The Military Officers Association of America has been working diligently on trying to get Chapter 61 retirees their concurrent receipt. A few years back, they stopped taxing retirees their retirement pay from their veterans pay. And if you guys could take it back to I know you're not on the Armed Services Committee, but take it back to them. It's gained some traction this last couple of years. The Richard Starr Act, I think, is the S 344. There's 575,000 veterans who are Chapter 61, and that means that they've been retired, they've been forced to retire before they hit 20 years of service because of an injury, not particularly combat related, but an injury that they received while on active duty. Now these people, it's the same as being combat injured because you're in that chain, right? If you're supplying, you're back home, you're sending stuff to the combat veterans. Just because you didn't hit 20 years, it wasn't your idea to retire, right?
Right.
The military said you are not fit for duty anymore. So if you could take a look at those, that HR, I think we've talked about before too, HR 333, S 344, everybody go out and read up on them and how that works. It would help a lot if we could get more. I think there's 50 co-sponsors on them right now, so if you could go out there and take a look at those and take them to your Armed Services Committee and
Sure.
kind of push that a little bit more. Just awareness.
Yeah.
Thanks, Michael. Appreciate everything you do for us.
I'll say one of the other first bills I introduced to Congress was the Improving Competence in Veterans Healthcare Act, and that had to do with doctors and medical professionals basically were being hired by the VA. Many of them would have their license revoked, and so they would move to a new state and begin to serve. Some of them, ended up doing some pretty horrendous things, and so we put together. It passed the House last term, didn't make it through the Senate, so we're working to get it through the House again this term. We have a couple other veterans bills we're working on.
And if you look at it, when I went in the Air Force in 1989, I was promised free medical and dental for the rest of my life if I retired. It's not a lot, but I pay $600 a year. I pay $31 copays for everything, and I've got a lot of issues: Parkinson's, hips, back, everything. So I'm going to the doctor a lot. I'm paying $31 copays. I'm fighting for my disability right now. Michael's fighting for my disability. But you see how things have changed over the years. The promises are made and then they're not kept. They did the concurrent receipt and they said, oh, you're Chapter 61, so we're not going to give you that. So the health thing would help a lot. So I'm glad that's seen.
And this is one thing I'll say: if you or you know someone who's a veteran who's dealing with that, one of the wonderful things we have in our office, and you know Louise and Jamie's here, Jamie and Mark are here. One of the things we have an honor of doing is helping veterans through their casework, and so working specifically on their case and trying to get resolution on it. So we've been able to get medals that should have been awarded, back as late as World War II back, and been able to get tens of thousands of dollars back to veterans that were overlooked. I'll say on that note, and this has been true of just the federal government at large over the last year, is a number of the agencies are teleworking still, and I call it tele-not working in the context of the federal government because, for example, the VA Records Center, we have to access that. They've been on 25% workload because of COVID at this point, and to me, it's like by now the rest of America's had to figure out how to move on and deal with it. So let's put the protections in place to get people back to work for our veterans, so we can get these cases solved. But that's been true, whether we're talking about the IRS, which some of y'all don't mind the IRS being a little behind them, but, as far as collections, somehow they're able to collect, but it's getting the money back, that.
Oh, they pick one side of the aisle to do that.
Yeah, so we continue to work on that, but that's, in all the top line issues, one of the things that gets overlooked a lot of times is that individual casework that we get to do, and so we've been, always feel free to reach out to us. Okay. Oh, yes, ma'am.
Well, I heard your speech on the eval with the tractor, but the car companies came out with statements the past week about how many evo vehicles they're gonna be putting on the market. And they're building new factories to manufacture them,
Yes.
and there's no stopping them?
Here's where we get into the supply chain issues. Yes, ma'am.
Could you repeat her question?
Okay, the question had to do with, car companies came out recently with an announcement that they're going to be building these new factories to build electric vehicles and put more on the market. A lot of the trillions of dollars that have been, and this is again where we go to kind of looking at the whole picture as opposed to, hey, what's an aspirational goal and let's throw money at it. So a lot of